Hey everyone, I got into the DANDÂN format a while ago. If you don't know what DANDÂN is, it's a community 80 card shared deck, shared graveyard format based around 10 copies of DANDÂN and 8 copies of Memory Lapse. I'll link the Ristic Studies video about DANDÂN in this video's description. I'm also into cube draft and design, which, if you don't know what a cube is, it's a draft where you use a pre-selected pool of cards to draft from, instead of sealed packs. I'll link the video series on Cube from Tolarian Community College in this video's description. Now, one of the owners of a local game store recently mentioned a DANDÂN cube, and that really piqued my interest. I looked around a few websites such as Cube Cobra and Moxfield, but I couldn't find any lists for a DANDÂN cube. I figured I'd make one myself based off of MTG Braden's DANDÂN list, which is the list featured in the Ristic Studies video. I did a little math, and here's what I've come up with so far. I believe the idea for a DANDÂN cube would be that you just do a regular draft, building a 40-card deck, and don't actually have a shared library and graveyard like normal DANDÂN. I'm not sure if this is a good idea, but I can't foresee a shared deck 40-card draft format working, and drafting an 80-card deck is definitely out of the question. I've made a few additions that aren't usually in DANDÂN. Assuming you aren't sharing a library and graveyard, you lose out on the shenanigans and back and forth of trying to manipulate the top card of the deck, stealing all the good cards and leaving your opponent with a handful of jank. To make up for this, I've swapped Narset's Reversal for Remand, and I've also added a couple copies of Thought Scour, which can mill a player and draw you a card. I think I'm going to put between 144 and 200 islands with the cube if I buy the cards and build it, or more likely proxy it out, since regular DANDÂN has 18 islands and the maximum number of players this cube can support is 8, so 8 times 18 is 144. I'm not sure whether that's a big deal, I just thought I'd pad out the runtime of this video a little bit. So that's all I have for today. If you have any ideas for the ratios of cards, I'm not certain whether 60 DANDÄNs is a good ratio, for example, or you have ideas for other cards that should be included in or cut from the cube, I'd appreciate you leaving a comment below. I plan on making an update video if I get some feedback on this project, so thank you for watching.